My sister didn't even look at me. Not when I walked in, not when she went up on stage. Not once. The ballroom was flooded in soft golden light, with glittering chandeliers hanging like icy crowns from the high ceiling. The scent of perfume, expensive and suffocating, hung heavy in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of polished wood and champagne. Everyone was dressed like they belonged on the cover of a magazine, floor-length gowns, neatly tailored dress uniforms, medals catching the light with every movement. I stood by the wall in a plain black dress, hands clasped in front of me, invisible. It was Lieutenant Commander Jenna Farrow's promotion ceremony. My little sister, the golden child. She stood on stage now, in her perfectly pressed uniform, flanked by officers and family. Our parents beamed with pride, their faces practically glowing with satisfaction. Dad in his navy blazer, Mom in her emerald green dress, both pretending I wasn't there. I had arrived alone, taking the train from 3 states away because I didn't own a car anymore. I'd RSVP'd weeks ago, no one replied. At the door, the military personnel checking names asked twice who I was. "Are you sure you're on the list?" the young man had asked, scanning his tablet with a raised brow. I nodded. I had to say my sister's name before they let me in. Inside, the room was filled with polished shoes and polite laughter. Officers, dignitaries, proud parents, and siblings. I kept near the back, not wanting to draw attention. The last time I saw Jenna, she told me plainly, "Please don't embarrass us. This is important." She hadn't even said hi before that, just that one sentence like a warning. As if my existence was something shameful. I tried to brush it off, but the words stayed with me like thorns in my skin. "Is that your sister?" someone whispered nearby. "The one in the black dress?" Another voice answered. I thought she wasn't coming. "She looks different." I pretended not to hear. The speeches had started, formal, full of protocol and respect. Commendations for valor, leadership, discipline. I watched Jenna as her commanding officer spoke about her career, her years of service, her discipline, the missions she had led. "A rising star," he said. "A model officer." The crowd applauded warmly. Our parents clapped the loudest, their smiles so wide they almost looked painful. When Jenna stepped forward to receive her insignia, she paused briefly. Our eyes met, just for a second. No smile, no acknowledgement, just a flash of annoyance in her gaze, like I was a stain on the otherwise pristine event. She turned away before I could react. I wanted to disappear into the wall. I felt the weight of every eye that glanced in my direction, every polite smirk, every strained nod of forced politeness from distant relatives who barely remembered my name. They hadn't seen me in over a decade, and judging by the way they avoided eye contact, they preferred it that way. "You're the older one, right?" a woman asked me earlier by the hors d'oeuvres table. She was holding a tiny glass of rose and wore a string of pearls that looked like it cost more than everything I owned. "Yes," I'd replied simply. She smiled politely, eyes skimming over me. "I remember you used to draw. Or write. Something creative, wasn't it? Something like that." She nodded with a kind of condescending sympathy. "Well, not everyone takes the same path. Look how far Jenna's come." I didn't respond. I just sipped my water. The applause swelled again. Jenna had finished her speech. Short, poised, professional. She thanked her team, her mentors, our parents. Not a single mention of me. Not even a word. I wasn't surprised, but it still hurt. As she stepped down from the podium, she moved through the rows of officers, shaking hands, smiling. Her posture was perfect, her image immaculate, and when she reached the row where I stood, her eyes passed over me like I was a stranger. Not a flicker of recognition. My chest tightened. This was her world now. Uniforms, medals, crisp salutes. And I was the forgotten one. The sibling who had disappeared, who didn't send holiday cards, who missed birthdays. The one no one talked about. I glanced at my parents. Mom was laughing with someone, maybe an admiral's wife, her manicured fingers lightly brushing her wine glass. Dad was already posing for a photo with Jenna. They hadn't said a single word to me since I arrived. Not even hello. Somewhere deep inside, I felt that old familiar shame creep in, the kind that used to gnaw at me during family dinners when Jenna's report cards were passed around like trophies, while mine were quietly ignored. The same shame that made me leave home the moment I turned 18, barely speaking a word. It was like I never belonged. I looked down at my plain dress. I had ironed it that morning. It was the nicest thing I owned. Still, I felt like a shadow in this place of gold and ceremony. The room buzzed with energy, everyone celebrating Jenna's moment. And I stood there, unseen, surrounded by people who had already written me off. To them, I was the failure who had chosen the wrong life. The one who didn't follow the rules. The one who didn't matter. I straightened my back and folded my hands again. I wasn't going to cry here, not in front of them. Not after everything. No one knew what I had been through since I left. No one asked. They didn't want to know. And in this place full of bright lights and proud salutes, I was just a ghost from the past they wished they could forget. I wasn't always invisible. There was a time, long ago, when I sat at that same family table and laughed like the rest of them. When Jenna and I shared a room, and we'd whisper secrets late into the night. But those moments are like scattered leaves now, memories I can barely gather. Jenna was the golden child from the beginning. Even when we were little, she walked with a kind of purpose, like she already knew where she was going. My parents noticed. They'd beam when she answered questions in school faster than the boys. She's sharp, Dad used to say. That one's going places. And I was always the one who colored outside the lines. Too quiet, too curious. I loved stories, old films, books with cracked spines. I'd disappear for hours into notebooks and scrap journals, sketching or writing about things that didn't exist. My teachers called me imaginative. My parents called me distracted. You could be more like your sister, Mom would say while cleaning up after dinner. Look at how focused she is. You're always lost in some dream. The truth is, I stopped trying to be like Jenna the day I realized I never could. When I turned 15, everything got worse. Dad lost his job for a while, and the house felt colder, not in temperature, but in spirit. Arguments became normal. Our parents leaned harder on Jenna, as if she was their last shot at success. She wore that pressure like a badge. I, on the other hand, drifted further away. I worked my first job at 16, cleaning at a diner after school, just to have money of my own. My parents hated it. It's beneath you, Dad said. But I didn't care. I liked the quiet of the empty kitchen after hours, the way the mop against tile gave me time to think. Jenna got a scholarship. I got tired. I left home at 18. No big scene. No screaming. I just packed a duffel bag and left a note. Mom never called. Dad sent one email 6 months later. A sentence long. Hope you're doing okay. I wasn't. Not at first. I slept on couches, worked graveyard shifts, delivered packages, cleaned hotel bathrooms, waited tables. I lost track of birthdays, of holidays. There was no time for sentiment when your rent was due and your feet hurt from standing 12 hours a day. I joined a private security agency after someone slipped a card into my hand during a night shift. I didn't think much of it. Just a card, a conversation, a training course I almost didn't attend. But it led somewhere. Slowly, quietly, I began to build something no one in my family knew about. Years passed. I learned how to fire weapons, how to keep a team alive under pressure, how to make decisions no one else wanted to make. I worked in conflict zones. I protected diplomats. I ran ops in places most people only see in headlines. No one in my family knew. And I liked it that way. Meanwhile, Jenna rose through the ranks. I saw her name in an article once. Youngest woman to lead X battalion. I felt something strange then. Not jealousy, not pride. Something colder. Distance. When our mother sent out the invitation for Jenna's promotion ceremony, it was more of a formality. It came addressed to Miss Farrow. Not even my first name. No handwritten note. Just a printed card. Still, something told me to go. I wanted to see her. Not to talk. Just to see her. To know how much had changed. To know whether I still felt like the one who ran away, or if I had become something else entirely. But stepping into that ballroom, it was clear. To them, I was still the girl who didn't belong. The one who left. The one who never amounted to anything. They didn't know I'd been in places that didn't make the news. That I'd seen men break down under fire and kept my team alive. That I'd led missions that saved lives. Quietly, discreetly, with no ceremony or applause. They didn't know I had earned respect in circles they'd never even imagined existed. Because my world didn't wear medals. It didn't hold ceremonies. It demanded silence. And I gave it. I stood in that room like a stranger because they had decided I was one. I didn't carry a title they recognized. I didn't wear a uniform they understood. But the weight on my shoulders, though invisible, was heavier than most of theirs. The pain of being forgotten was one thing, but being dismissed before they even knew who you were? That cut deeper. My mother glanced at me once during the reception. Just once. I caught her expression before she turned away, mild discomfort, like I had brought something shameful with me. I almost laughed. They thought I had failed, that I'd wasted my life in some obscure corner of the world while Jenna carved her name into stone. But I had no interest in their approval anymore. What hurt, what always hurt, was that even when I stood right in front of them, they never asked who I had become. Because they already decided I was nobody. The night wore on with forced toasts and rehearsed smiles. A string quartet played softly in the background, their music delicate and precise, just like everything else in the room. Servers moved like ghosts, carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres, weaving between clusters of guests locked in self-congratulatory chatter. I remained near the edge of the crowd, watching, listening. A younger officer, fresh-faced, probably just out of the academy, stepped up to make a tribute speech. He was clearly nervous, stumbling over his words as he praised Lieutenant Commander Jenna Farrow. I watched Jenna from a distance. She stood tall, expression calm, polished to perfection. Her hands rested behind her back in that formal stance she had mastered. She was everything they wanted her to be. "She's not just an exemplary officer," the young man said, voice rising slightly. "She's the kind of leader you follow without question, because you know she'd never ask you to do something she wouldn't do herself." Another round of applause followed. Proud nods. My mother dabbed her eyes with a napkin. I felt my throat tighten, not because I doubted Jenna's accomplishments, but because in that whole room, no one had ever considered that I, too, had made decisions like that. In silence, without witness, I shifted my weight, my back stiff from standing so long. No one had offered me a seat. No one had even offered me a glass of wine. Then, as the applause died down, someone called for a few words from the family. Jenna hesitated just a moment before stepping up to the podium again. Her voice was steady. "I'm grateful for the guidance of my mentors," she began, "and for the unwavering support of my family. My parents have been my anchor. And to my brother, who couldn't be here tonight, I know you're watching and I carry you with me." I flinched. The omission was deliberate. She hadn't forgotten me. She'd erased me. A murmur rippled through the guests. A few turned to glance at me, unsure of what to think. One woman frowned, whispering something to her companion. I stood still, the silence ringing louder than any insult could. She looked directly over my head as she stepped down. And then, as if on cue, one of the more senior officers approached her, clapping her on the back. "Your family must be proud," he said loudly. She smiled. "They are. We all serve in our own ways." The officer chuckled. "Except the ones who don't serve at all, right?" Jenna laughed lightly. "Well, we all have our own paths." I stared at her. That sentence, it wasn't casual. It was aimed like a knife, carefully wrapped in civility. The crowd chuckled. My hands clenched by my sides. But I didn't move. I didn't speak. They didn't deserve my story. Still, I felt something shift inside me. A weight I hadn't noticed until that moment, pressing down harder with every second I stood among people who had no idea what silence I'd endured to stand here at all. I turned toward the exit. Not to leave, just to breathe. Then, I heard it. The heavy doors at the far end of the ballroom opened. Not dramatically, but with purpose. A pause spread through the crowd. The string quartet stopped mid-piece, awkward and abrupt. Two uniformed men stepped through, both tall, in crisp black tactical uniforms with silver trim. Not Navy, not from this base. These were special operations insignias. And behind them, a third figure appeared. Broad-shouldered, confident, an older man with graying hair and the bearing of someone used to command. The crowd shifted, uncertain. Someone near the entrance whispered, "That's from Central Command." I watched the three figures move with efficiency, cutting through the guests like they weren't even there. One of the officers approached a security detail stationed at the edge of the room. Words were exchanged, quiet, firm. My skin prickled. Something was happening. Something no one here had expected. My sister's smile faltered. She glanced toward the men. They weren't looking at her. They were scanning the room, searching. My breath caught as one of them turned toward my side of the ballroom. His eyes locked with mine just for a second. Then he turned and murmured something into a device on his wrist. I stayed where I was, heart thudding now. Not from fear, but from the awful, growing certainty that my worlds were about to collide in a way I could never undo. Another whisper, louder this time. Who are they looking for? They're not local. Are they here for the lieutenant commander? I saw my father straighten his jacket. My mother touched her hair. Everyone was preparing for another ceremony. But I knew. They weren't here for Jenna. And the moment was coming. That sharp, inevitable moment when the wall I had spent a decade building between my past and my present would crack, and everything would pour out. A cold stillness settled over the ballroom, like the moment just before a storm breaks. I didn't move. The man at the front, the one who had arrived with the 2 tactical officers, walked straight through the center of the room, ignoring the gasps, the curious stares. His boots echoed across the marble floor with a weight that silenced everything else. He was tall, broad-chested, in a sleek black uniform with a silver insignia on his left shoulder, one I knew too well. General Adrian Stokes, Director of Strategic Field Operations. The man whose direct orders I had followed more times than I could count. The man whose life I'd once pulled out of a burning embassy. He stopped in the center of the room, scanned the sea of stunned faces, and then his eyes landed on me. My pulse roared in my ears. I felt every pair of eyes turn with his gaze. He took a single step forward, then another, and then, to the stunned silence of every person in the ballroom, including my parents and my sister, he came to a halt just 2 feet in front of me. The air was electric. He drew a sharp breath, then spoke in a voice loud and clear, each word crisp as a blade. Commander Farrow. The room froze. For a breathless moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, he meant Jenna. But then he added, without hesitation, Commander Alira Farrow. Ma'am, we've got a situation in the southern corridor. Tactical Unit Echo is in position, but we need your directive before proceeding. He saluted me, the kind of salute you give to someone you trust with your life. My world tipped slightly, but I kept my posture. My hands, calm at my sides, didn't shake. My voice came quieter than his, but firm, resolute. Status on the ground? He answered without skipping a beat. Hostage extraction. 2 assets confirmed. 1 potential civilian. They're awaiting your go. I nodded, then tilted my head slightly. Patch me through to ops. He tapped his wrist device and handed me a comm link. I turned slightly to shield my mouth from the growing crowd of whispering guests and issued 3 short commands. Rapid, precise, clinical. Team Echo, proceed with Phase Alpha. Target secure, perimeter containment active. No casualties. A voice crackled back. Confirmed, Commander. We're moving. I handed the device back to General Stokes. Thank you, sir. He didn't leave right away. He turned to the stunned audience, his voice calm but heavy with significance. For those of you who don't know, he said, this is Commander Alira Farrow, lead strategic operator under Black Shield Command. She's run 22 international extractions and led joint security for 3 peace summits. When lives are on the line, she's the one we call. He paused. We're lucky she was in the area. A ripple of shock passed through the crowd like a wave. I didn't look at my parents. I didn't look at Jenna. But I felt them. Their silence. Their confusion. Their shame. They knew now. Everyone knew. The general gave me a final nod, then turned and exited with his team as swiftly as he had arrived. The heavy doors swung closed behind them, leaving the ballroom hushed and reeling. I stood in place, not out of pride, not out of vindication, but because I didn't know how else to breathe in that moment. A woman near the buffet whispered, "She's military?" "No, not just military." Someone else replied, "She's above." I turned slowly. Faces stared at me now as something new. Not judgment, not pity, respect, fear. And Jenna stood like a statue near the stage, her hands clenched at her sides. Her mouth slightly parted, eyes locked on mine as if seeing me for the first time in her life. She looked small. All the polish, all the posture, gone in an instant. Her voice finally came, brittle and soft. "You're with Black Shield?" I held her gaze. For a long moment, I didn't speak. And when I did, my voice didn't carry anger. Just truth. I've always been. And with that, I turned. Not with drama. Not to storm out. I simply walked. Past the guests. Past the whispers. Past the line of medals that had once seemed to measure someone's worth. No one stopped me. Because now they all knew. The one they ignored, the one they pitied, was the one who had been saving lives in the dark, while they toasted their ceremonies in the light. The hallway outside the ballroom was quiet, cooler. The distant sounds of laughter and clinking glasses faded behind those grand doors, as if the entire ceremony had happened in another lifetime. I walked slowly, each step feeling heavier now that the adrenaline had worn off. I could still feel the weight of their stares, burning, stunned, reverent. But none of that touched me where it mattered. Not really. I reached a side corridor lined with old naval portraits. Generals and admirals, captured mid-command or in rigid salutes. Their eyes seemed to follow me. I leaned against the cool wall beneath one of them and exhaled for what felt like the first time all night. There was no satisfaction in what had just happened. I hadn't come to expose anyone. I hadn't planned for any of it. I had only wanted to be present, quietly, on the margins. But fate doesn't always let us stay invisible, does it? The silence was interrupted by soft footsteps behind me. I didn't have to turn to know who it was. Why didn't you ever tell us? Jenna's voice was barely a whisper. I looked over my shoulder. She stood alone, no crowd, no officers, no family around her. Just her and me, and a decade of silence stretching like a chasm between us. I turned to face her fully. Would it have made a difference? I asked gently. She flinched, but didn't answer. I was 19 when I started, I said. I worked for 5 years before they even gave me a field designation. I've seen things I can't talk about, lost people whose names aren't written anywhere. I never told anyone because it wasn't about being known. It was about doing the job. She stepped closer. Her eyes, so sharp on stage, were clouded now, unsure. I thought you just left. That you gave up. My jaw tightened. No, I said quietly. I didn't give up. I gave everything. She looked down, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her cuff. You were always different, she murmured. I didn't know. I didn't know how far that would take you. I smiled, sat tired, and I always knew exactly how far you'd go, because they told me every day to be more like you. She didn't defend herself. She couldn't. I never meant to erase you, she said after a pause. But you did. I replied, not unkindly. Every word you left out, every look you didn't give, every introduction where I was just the sister. You didn't mean to, but you did. A beat of silence. She looked up again. I'm sorry. I believed her. In her own way, she meant it. But the truth is, some wounds don't close just because someone says the right thing. They close when you've bled long enough that the scar hardens on its own. I nodded, offering her a calm, almost kind look. It's okay, Jenna. I didn't need the world to see me. I just needed to see myself. Her eyes welled, but she didn't let the tears fall. She was still in uniform, still holding the last pieces of her composure. And I didn't want to take that from her. So I stepped past her toward the exit. She didn't stop me. At the doors, I looked back once, just once. Our mother stood near the ballroom entrance now, staring at me with wide, searching eyes. Not proud, not relieved, just confused, like she'd been handed a puzzle where none of the pieces fit anymore. I gave her a nod. No smile. Just that. I didn't know them more than that. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin. The moon hung low over the parking lot. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter hummed faintly. Probably mine. I walked slowly toward it, the sound of my boots steady on the pavement. As I reached the landing pad, I paused and looked back at the building, its gold lights and tall windows still glowing with celebration. I thought about everything I could have said, all the years I spent being invisible. But none of that mattered now. They had seen me, for the first time, for real. And it was too late to change who I had become. As the blades began to spin and the wind picked up, I whispered the truth I had carried for so long. Tonight, my sister finally saw me, but I'm not sure she recognized the price of the silence. And then I climbed in, strapped my gear, and left. Not out of anger, but because some stories don't need revenge. Just the dignity of being told,